Let me tell you something, taking a man's money is one thing, taking a man's watch is another, but having your pride stolen from you is something that's impossible to come to terms with. You see, it's more personal, it's more painful, and it's more damaging to your mental health than any other type of theft that I've ever experienced. You see, by now I was a veteran where robbery and violence was concerned, the shock and the horror, so it wasn't new to me. And by 2014, watch dealers across the country were regularly being targeted by violent criminal gangs. So much so that we used to joke amongst ourselves, if you hadn't been robbed, you weren't a proper watch dealer. So I'd learnt to live with the threat, day and night, at work and at home. And by now, even my wife had become used to living behind a solid steel front door with laser alarms surrounding the house at night. The foxes would sometimes set them off and give us a fright at 3 a.m. in the morning, but it was all necessity. It was all just a part of the job. The permanently locked windows, the never answering the door to anyone no matter who they said they were. The trackers found on my car and the police calling me to tell me one afternoon that my home address had been found on the cell phone of an active gang arrested in their area and that we were on their list. But nothing could prepare me for the day that two masked men would launch a swift, a cowardly and a violent attack on both me and my nephew that left us both badly injured and at least one of us with mental scars that are still as raw and as fresh today as they were the day after it happened. Welcome back, watch people. Now, for those of you that haven't yet seen parts 1 and 2 of this 3-part mini-series, I'd advise that you go back and check those out before watching this one, the most dramatic, the most upsetting, and indeed the concluding episode. This is robbery number 3, up close and personal, the final straw. So guys, this is where it all started that afternoon. That's my old shop just behind me there. And both myself and my nephew Alfie came out of that front door around 4 p.m. on Thursday, August the 14th, 2014. And we walked along this road here past the old Tudor buildings as we headed towards my white Range Rover Sport that was parked just a couple of 100 yards away. We're going to walk that route now and I'm going to tell you exactly what took place that afternoon. Alfie and I had left the shop and we were, as I say, walking past these lovely Tudor buildings here that are based in East Grinstead. They were built around 1450, beautiful buildings, and it was a day pretty much like today, quite bright and quite brisk. I do remember carrying umbrellas, so it'd obviously been raining at some stage that day, but on the afternoon of the 14th of August that year, it was a bright sunny afternoon and we made our way about 200 yards, I guess, to the area where my car was parked. And it was just an ordinary, regular day. We closed the shop at 4 o'clock and we'd finished our business for the day. And we started to make our way back towards our car. I would drop Alfie off as he lived locally. And then I would go home. And as I said, the walk from the shop to where my car was parked on a regular basis was only about 200 yards. I think, as I possibly can remember, I'm not entirely sure if this is correct or not, but I do seem to recall a motorbike passing me on my left-hand side at one stage. I'm 99% sure a motorbike did pass me going that way, heading towards where my car would have been parked. But in all honesty, I'm not entirely sure. It may or may not have been. So as we now approach the car park where my car was, I'd rented a private car park space that was close to the shop. It was just handy. And I remember to this day that I would have been here and Alfie would have been to my right, and my car was parked just where that greeny yellow car is. And I walked in here and Alfie had now walked ahead of me to get into the car. I'd just about to hit the remote on my car to unlock it. I did actually hear, I must have done, and just as I hit it, someone came from behind and attacked me from behind. It turned out that they'd been hiding in this bin shed. There's a bin shed just there. They'd been laying in wait for me there. And as he hit me, I don't know what he hit me with, but whatever it was, he'd done a magnificent job. I immediately collapsed and was unconscious. I didn't know until after the event that my nephew had jumped out of the car. He'd sort of got one leg in the car to get in. When he saw what was happening, he immediately come back out and jumped on my attacker. And the accomplice, the guy that attacked me, his accomplice had pulled up on his motorbike just here. And when he saw what was taking place, he jumped off his motorbike really quickly, dropped the motorbike fell over, and came to assist his accomplice, who was now in a hand-to-hand battle with Alfie. At this time, I was unconscious. There was a lapse in time for me. It was quite weird because I remember going down and I obviously remember waking up. What I don't remember is the bit in between. So I was laying just about here. I was laying just about here. I didn't know, but at the time Alfie was now fighting with two men behind me over here. They were big guys, very powerful, very strong, that's all I can say. They were just big men. And sadly, Alfie succumbed ultimately, and I was laying on the floor here, prostrate, in exactly where I'm standing right now. And as I laid on the floor, probably the most hurtful thing that I can remember, I actually think it was the guy himself that kind of brought me round by moving again, because I'd been unconscious now for probably about a minute. And the first thing that I remember when I woke up, it was like I was in a dream. It was like that moment when you first wake up and you're not sure if you're awake or you're asleep, but you know something's happening. And I remember him lifting up my wrist and saying to me, "Give me that fucking watch." That was just a complete haze. And then all of a sudden it was like I'd been resurrected. I just jumped up really quick and I moved this way really fast to get away from whatever threat there was. I turned round, still unaware that Alfie had been beaten up. I just didn't know where he was. I couldn't see him. I didn't know what he was doing or where he was. It turned out that he was over towards the side of my car, unconscious himself. And as I ran out towards this way to give myself as much possible space between me and my attackers. And I remember getting almost to the other side of the road, probably to about here. Remember, there's a motorcycle now laying on the floor. And at this stage, I only actually remember seeing one attacker. He was standing almost by the motorbike. And I still don't know, if I'm honest, I still can't remember if I'd realised Alfie's situation or not. I just can't honestly say. But I knew that we was both under attack. I knew it was happening and I knew that we was both in trouble. And with that, I made the decision to put up a fight, to go back towards the attacker that I could see at least. I could only see one at this stage. Bearing in mind, I'd only been conscious again for probably less than 30 seconds. And I made my move back towards the attacker, who was standing just here. And I got to within 4 feet of him, 3 or 4 feet of him. And he put his arm in his jacket and revealed a machete that he had tucked in his jacket. And with that, I kind of stood back and there was nothing that I could do. Now, probably the most annoying part about this of all, the whole thing that really frustrates me, is that whilst this whole thing was going on, a middle-aged gentleman had pulled up in his car just over here and had sat watching the whole thing. He didn't dial the police, he just sat watching events as they panned out, didn't lock his door, just sat there as a spectator, which I kind of get, but call the police or lock your door at least. And the two robbers then lifted up their motorbike and tried to get it started, and it wouldn't start. It obviously flooded. It was a stolen bike that had actually was in this car park over the road. The guy on the bike had parked over there. whilst his attacker, my attacker, initial attacker, hidden in where the bins are over in the car park there. And when the attack started, he rode his motorbike out here and parked it just across the road. They couldn't get their bike started. They were now in big trouble. Their only means of getaway wasn't working, and they had a problem. They had to get away, and they had to get away fast. The member of the public sitting here in his car just sat there and watched two men dressed in black with masks on and black crash helmets. He watched them walk over to his car. They opened the door, pulled him out, threw him out of the car, and off they drove. They made their getaway after hijacking his vehicle, driving back up Portland Road towards where the shop would have been. At this stage, I realised that Alfie was in trouble. I was trying to wake him up. He came round fairly quickly, and I think I just said to him, probably rather stupidly, we've been done, which was probably pretty obvious, to be fair. And I tried to, Alfie was quite badly injured. He was really not good. And I tried to get him in the car and helped him in the car, and I think somehow I managed to throw him in the back seat. And I wanted to try and give chase to these guys. And I reversed the car out really quick and tried to follow them up Portland Road. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to go back up towards the top of Portland Road, back up towards where the shop is. And I'm going to show you what took place there. So of course, by the time Alfie and I had got to the end of Portland Road, they'd already made their escape, and we didn't find out until afterwards that as we approached this corner, a van pulled around, and they mounted the pavement in their car, narrowly missing a young mum with a pram. And apparently it was really, really that close, which just goes to show how desperate these guys have become to make their escape. So this is the corner where they mounted the pavement. A lorry had pulled in just about here, and they had virtually no room to make their escape. So they mounted the pavement just here to get back out onto the high street. So what we know from there is that they then made their way back out onto the high street. Their escape plan now completely really in tatters, as their stolen motorcycle had been left behind, and they made their way towards the exit where they could get back onto the A22 heading south. One of the really annoying things, and to this day I still can't recall his name, but during the attack I do remember one of the guys shouting out the other one's name. He didn't shout it out once, he didn't shout it out twice, he shouted it out 3 times. And I remember thinking, I must remember that name, but to this day it's just not there. So as Alfie and I gave chase, trying to follow these guys, we fairly quickly realised that there was no point because they got away. I wasn't at this time sure whether they turned left or right. It turns out that they turned right, and they'd followed the route that I'm taking right now. Their getaway car was parked in a car park called Rabies Heath Road, where we'll go now and where the rest of the story pans out. But what we do know from eyewitnesses afterwards is that they followed this precise route that I'm taking right now, which takes you back onto the A22 heading either south or north, and they wanted to head north. So the journey time would have been approximately 10 to 15 minutes. We do know that they smoked the backside out of that car because a witness saw it with tyres smoking apparently when they pulled up eventually where they dumped the car. About 5 or 6 miles, I guess, as the crow flies down the A22. Obviously the police had been called. Numerous people had seen the attack. The guy who allowed them to hijack his car had now decided that it was time to call the police. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit bitter towards that guy, but I still to this day can't understand why he just sat there and allowed them to take his car? Why didn't he just drive off or at least lock the doors? I guess maybe he too was in shock, I don't know. Obviously he didn't mean to help them, it's just the way it turned out. So we're about 5-6 miles as the crow flies north of where the incident took place, and we're heading now into a road called Raby's Heath Road. This is where I believe the ultimate getaway car, their final getaway vehicle, was parked. And there was a couple of ironies here involved as well. It later transpired that a friend of my eldest daughter was on her way to work down the same road when a black BMW pulled out of this car park and nearly collided with her. I gave those details and that information to the police, and they never even bothered to speak to her. So we're going to pull into the car park now where the final getaway vehicle was parked. It's just here. And an eyewitness, a very reliable eyewitness, said that a black BMW, either an X5 or an X6, was parked in this spot right here. So we're now in the car park where the bad guys made their final getaway, and parked just where my car is now was that black BMW. We believe it was an X6, it could have been an X5, and the eyewitness, who, as I said, was very reliable, saw it all, saw two men exiting the stolen car with a third person waiting in the final getaway vehicle, which then left the car park, turned right, headed back towards the A22 where it could make its way north on the M25. Now this for me is where my issues with the police once again arose. We had a very, very good and reliable eyewitness that was barely questioned by the police as the car pulled out and swung right, nearly collided with my daughter's friend. She was also a witness. They never ever bothered to speak to her, never spoke to her, and I was just amazed that more couldn't have been made of it, because for me this car was never meant to have been seen. The car that was waiting in this car park was never meant to be seen by anyone. It was the final getaway vehicle. Their initial plan was obviously to ride their stolen motorbike back here, dump it in this car park and get away in their final getaway vehicle. Instead of that, they had to abandon the bike in East Grinstead because they couldn't get it started. They hijacked the car, bought the stolen car here, and this, right in this very spot, is where it was dumped. So as they swung out of this car park, for me, the whole getaway had been a bit of a disaster for them. Not only had they lost their original getaway vehicle, potentially yielding some evidence against them, DNA, fingerprints maybe, whatever. Also, the car that they hijacked, that was another vehicle that could have yielded some evidence. And of course, they hadn't planned on being seen at the scene of the getaway. No doubt they were now concerned, but knowing our police, they probably didn't have to be, unfortunately. So they made their way back along Raby's Heath Road, and when they got to the bottom, they turned left and headed towards junction 6 of the M25. So let's just go very quickly through what we know about these guys right now. The time is now approximately 4:28 to 4:30 p.m. on the afternoon of August the 14th. We know there is a black BMW getaway car described almost certainly as an X6, possibly an X5, and we know there are 3 males in the car, and the witness that was in the car park has given the police a description of the 3 males, all dressed in black, making their getaway from that car park. So we know the time, we know the area, we know the day, the date, we know what they look like, we know what car they're driving, we know all that information. But how could that information have been collated, and how could it have been really useful in evidence in trying to identify these guys? And this is where the whole thing starts to get super annoying. This is where it starts to get really frustrating. This is where my anger with the police once again starts, because they just failed to do their job properly. A 5-year-old could have identified these guys if they wanted to. The bottom line is, they just couldn't be bothered. And you know what? Some people say, Paul, the police were in on this. Well, I don't believe that. That's ridiculous. You know, I know they're bad, but they ain't that bad. It's just a simple case of they were useless. They're utterly hopeless. They're lazy. They couldn't be bothered. And time again, I went to them and said, look, I suggest this, I suggest that. And all they would ever say to me was, Paul, bring us the evidence. Well, even when I brought them the evidence, they still didn't do anything about it. Did they have anything against me personally? Did they just not like me? Did they not investigate these robberies for any sinister reason? I don't believe that to be the case. They didn't like me because I told the media how useless they were. But the real media explosion never happened until this occurrence, and this was the one that wrangles with me most of all. This was the robbery where the police, if they'd have even acted on 10% of the information that was clearly available to them, this is the one where these guys could easily have been caught. So we're just heading up towards junction 6 of the M25. Yes, the M25, the motorway in the UK with more cameras than any other motorway in the UK. Heading up towards junction 6 of the M25, 4:30 in the afternoon. We are looking for a black BMW X5 X6 exiting this roundabout at 4:30, give or take a minute or two on the afternoon of that day. I suggested that the police came and reviewed the security cameras, the APNR cameras at junction 6 of the M25. Initially, they lied and told me that there wasn't any, so I travelled down to the junction myself, had a look round on foot and counted 6 cameras on junction 6 alone, bearing in mind that we have junction 7 and junction 8 and 9 and 4 and 5 going the other way. Look, even if the cameras weren't working at junction 6, they would have been working at the next junction. The police never bothered to check them. And when I went back and pointed out to them that there were in fact 6 cameras at junction 6, they told me they weren't working. So there are only 3 exits on junction 6 of the M25. One heads east, one heads west, and one heads north towards Croydon. I'm pretty convinced that they carried on their journey on the M25, heading either east or west. I can't tell you because I didn't have access to the cameras, but access to those cameras and identifying that vehicle at that time of the day would have been absolute child's play for the police if they wanted to. And I believe that that car belonged to one of the robbers. I believe it was their own personal vehicle. It wasn't a stolen vehicle. And any APNR camera that had been viewed, inspected and properly investigated would almost certainly have revealed that getaway car's identity. So let's have a quick recap. What did we have? We had the motorbike potentially yielding forensic evidence. We had the stolen car potentially yielding forensic evidence. We had cameras left, right and centre would have picked up the getaway car that would have yielded evidence. The bottom line is the police looked at none of it. They just didn't bother. They took the motorcycle away. They told me that they examined it and there was no forensics. They told me that there was no forensics in the stolen hijacked car. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Frankly, I don't believe them. But there was another piece of evidence that the police ignored, which drove me to the point of absolute insanity. My young nephew, Alfie, who had been taken away in an ambulance after we gave up the chase. An ambulance was called and Alfie was whisked away in the ambulance. He had a fractured jaw, broken teeth. I was spitting teeth. I lost about 5 teeth in that attack and I could barely talk without spitting blood. But Alfie was in an even worse situation, and he had been rolling on the floor fighting in close proximity with one of our attackers back in East Grinstead in that car park, and Alfie's shirt was covered in blood and had been in very close contact with one of the assailants. And we asked the police to take that shirt away, and examine it forensically for DNA, because Alfie was sure that he'd landed a couple of good blows and that there might have potentially even been some of our attacker's blood on his blood-stained shirt. We asked the police to take the shirt for a forensic examination. We begged them, we pleaded with them on national radio to take the shirt and forensically examine it. 3 years later, it was still in Alfie's possession, laying under his bed. The police never did take that shirt and examine it. That shirt to this day could still yield DNA evidence that could potentially reveal the identity of one of our attackers, and still the police refused to look at it. One of the excuses that the police gave me as to why they didn't take away the shirt and examine that from a forensic viewpoint was this. They said, Paul, forensic examinations cost us a lot of money. They're about £500 a pop. Those were his words, not mine. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he told me that they'd already examined the motorbike, they'd already examined the car, and they just didn't have it in their budget to do the shirt as well. And I found all this absolutely mind-boggling and incredible, considering that these two guys had virtually left me and Alfie for dead. They could have quite easily killed one of us that afternoon. The ferocity of the attack, the viciousness of the attack, the fact that the attack was unexpected and came from behind, could have quite easily left one of us with life-changing injuries. It left Alfie and I with a combined dental bill of about £20,000 to put our teeth right after the damage they'd done to us. This wasn't a kid stealing sweets out of the pound shop. This was a vicious, aggravated armed robbery, and the police just didn't seem up for it. I said in a previous video that whilst it's you guys that often thank me for the things that I allegedly do for the watch community, in truth it should be me that thanks you guys for watching these videos and for the support that you offer me. I do what I do in the hope that perhaps one day the scars might heal. And I tell my wife and my family not to worry, that I'm over all this and that it's now just a distant memory. But if I'm honest, you can probably tell that's a long way from being the truth. And coming so close on more than one occasion to being taken away from those that you love, whether it be by the police or our crazy self-defence laws, or at the hands of bad guys wearing masks and brandishing weapons, it isn't something that goes away very quickly, if ever. Like I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'm not sure who left the biggest scars in my mind after these 3 robberies. The people that actually did it, or the police who betrayed me and my family and were simply an utter disgrace to their uniform. I guess you can take your pick, because frankly I have about the same amount of respect for all of them. And even if I didn't quite realise it at that moment, my time as a watch dealer was now slowly and finally coming to an end. As my wife arrived at the scene shortly after that final robbery, I've never seen her in such a state. She burst into tears, cuddled up to me, and I tried to talk to her, but I couldn't. All I could do was spit teeth and blood, and she angrily said to me, Paul, no one does this to you. You've got to stop this now before they kill you. And if that wasn't enough to make up my mind, I'd later learn that news of the robbery and some terrible rumours had somehow got back to my youngest daughter's school, where she was doing some kind of after-school workshop. Can you imagine her panic? I just couldn't put my girls through any more of this. And with absolutely no support whatsoever from the police and the total inability to be able to defend myself without the risk of being prosecuted, I decided that I had to end my lifelong relationship with watch stealing. In fact, It was almost another 3 years before I finally managed to sell my house, move out of the area, my business, and to cross all the T's and dot all the I's to close the books on a lifetime's work. The people responsible for that last attack might just think that all they stole from me that day was my watch, when in truth they stole a lot more from me than just that. And I don't know whether or not I believe in ghosts and demons, but one thing's for sure, if there is such a thing, when I die, every whisper that those people hear, every wind that rushes through their hair, and every door that ever creaks will be me, haunting them for the rest of their lives. And even then, I'm still hoping to be waiting for them on the other side. You see, taking a man's money is one thing, taking his watch is another, but stealing his pride is simply unforgivable.